Unsolved crimes. This is a Monday Night Mystery with Mitch McCoy.
It has been 6 years since Maranda Goldman was found dead in Pine Bluff. She left a job interview, called her mom, said, "Hey, Mom, I'm headed home." But she never returned home. Her car found not far from that Goodwill store, broken down. What happened to Maranda Goldman? We are diving in to a Monday Night Mystery. Thanks for joining us tonight on Fox16.com, KARK.com, across all of our digital platforms. I'm Mitch McCoy. I'm glad you're along with us tonight. We have a very important show to get to, a very important case. We'll get to Sandy Goldman, Maranda's mom, in just a moment. I want to know more about Maranda, her life, and what the family is doing to bring justice to Maranda's case. But first, I want to get to the panel tonight, and it's the same faces we see quite often here. Tommy and Cara are off on this Monday night. We have LATRESHA Woodruff there at the upper left-hand corner, Sergeant Thomas Cole, a major crimes detective, and Kelly Ward, a former prosecutor who has a long history in the courtroom and knows how to deliver justice. Thank you all for joining me tonight, and thanks for joining us here as people are starting to interact right now using the hashtag Monday Night Mystery. You can ask our panel questions during tonight's show. I want to get to LATRESHA Woodruff. She has a case timeline for us here. LATRESHA, it's very important people pay attention to all of these dates and times because this could help us discuss this case tonight.
We are hoping it helps us discuss this case and hoping that it brings about some leads on this case. As you stated, this is definitely a mystery of what happened to Maranda Goldman. She's 23 years old. She went missing on October 8th, 2015. Again, as you stated, she went missing after she left a job interview at Goodwill in Pine Bluff. A month later, her body was found in a wooded area, and the Pine Bluff Police Department has been investigating this ever since. We're looking for answers tonight. Her family deserves some answers on this, and we need to find some justice for 23-year-old Maranda Goldman. There's a Facebook page, the Maranda Michelle Goldman Facebook page, where people continue to go on there and interact with that page, leaving messages saying that they miss her smile, and they're hoping that after nearly, 6 years, that this case is finally solved for Maranda's family and to bring some justice for Maranda as well.
You know, what I find interesting, and we've all been diving into this case over the last week or so as we're doing our research ahead of tonight's show, the body of Maranda Goldman, and I'm kind of skipping ahead here because Maranda went to that job interview at the Goodwill store. She called her mom, said, "Mom, I'm headed home." She never returned home. Police started a massive search for her, and about a month later, authorities get an anonymous tip from a woman. It's the mystery woman who says, hey, her body is near 38th and Ohio Street in Pine Bluff, near a pond in the woods. And police to this day have not been able to find this mystery woman. I want to get to Sergeant Thomas Cole, a major crimes detective. He has a history of solving unsolved homicides and solving major cases. Sergeant, what do you make out of this mystery woman and the fact that police can't find her?
Yeah, it's definitely interesting, Mitch. I know we take tips all the time from the most mundane shoplifting cases to bigger cases like this, and it's pretty common for folks to call in and ask to be anonymous. More often than not, though, like we've talked about before, we have to kind of triage all these tips that are coming in. So we try to get some kind of information from the folks, whether it's, if you are in some way related to a suspect or, where did you come upon this information? How did you get it? Because all of that helps us to kind of sort out the stack of leads that we have. So I don't know what information they may or may not have gotten from the tipster in this case. And of course, there are different ways that folks can leave tips. More often than not, there's some kind of a paper trail on it, but that might not always be the case. So I would be interested to know as much as possible about this lady, because it certainly is interesting that if the body was found a month later, how did this tipster know that it was Maranda Goldman? so it makes me think that that person may know a little more than just where the body was.
Well, and Kelly Ward, former prosecutor, we know people call in tips all the time because of hearsay. But the fact that you call in and say her body is near 38th and Ohio Street in the woods, giving an exact location, this person has direct knowledge.
You would think so. If this person said you can find Maranda Goldman at this location, then they probably have direct knowledge. Not only that, the body had been there, or maybe not. I mean, she'd been missing for 33 days. So I guess the question for investigators will be, first of all, to find this woman. Second, what's the condition of the body? Has it been there the whole time, or was it recently placed there? If she's just now calling in this tip, it might make investigators think that she just gained the information, or it was recently placed there, because it sounds like information that's pretty recent in time.
I want to get now to Sandy Goldman. This is Miranda's mom. Sandy, thank you so much for coming on tonight. I really appreciate it. I know this has been so difficult for you guys. I can't even imagine. Walk me through, what do we know about this woman that called in the anonymous tip?
They said that they could never find out that it was the blocked number. And the Pine Bluff Police Department said that they could never locate who had called in the anonymous tip, which I'm just thankful to God that someone did, to where I could bring Miranda home, because she had already been gone a month and a half. And for some reason, I don't know why it couldn't be traced with all the new technology that we have today, but it's been 6.5 years. October 8th last year was the last time I seen Miranda that morning. But you would think that, go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. And she called you, right? Right after her job interview, she had called you and said,
yeah,
hey, I'm coming home.
Yes, that she was through, and that she's headed my way. And I told her to come on, because we just had one car. And I started to try to call her phone, and, an hour or so later, it was dead or turned off or whatever. But as far as I waited all night because I didn't have a car, and Miranda called me 23 times a day. I mean, we were very, very close. And the next morning, I called my oldest daughter, and when I seen my car still sitting in the Goodwill parking lot, I just knew in my heart that something had happened.
Oh, tell me a little bit about Miranda. Tell me about your daughter. What do you want people to know about her?
She had a very big heart. She would give you the shirt off her back. She got along with everybody. She never met a stranger. But she trusted everybody. And nowadays, the world's just so crazy. And even back then, but everybody that knew Miranda, everywhere she worked, just loved her. She's a hard worker. She was a nice person. She would help anybody. I just need tips of any kind. I need some kind of information that will help solve the case. 6.5 years. I just want justice for my daughter. I know that justice will be served. I know Miranda's in heaven, and one day I will see her. But may God touch just one person out there that has had a child in the last 6.5 years, and to see, not that I would want any parent to have to understand what I've gone through, but to know what it's like for your child to come up missing for a month and a half and then found out in the field, you know, dead. I'm just hoping that God touches somebody's heart that has some kind of hard evidence that can help close the case and to get justice for Maranda.
Sandy Goldman, Miranda's mom, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so very much, and God bless you guys.
That interview happening with Miranda's mom just a little while ago. You feel for her and their entire family. If you're just joining us tonight, you're watching Monday Night Mystery right here on KRK.com, Fox16.com, and across all of our digital platforms. I want to make sure you know about our hashtag tonight. Use the hashtag Monday Night Mystery, and you can ask the panel questions during tonight's show as we discuss this case. I want to bring back the panel here. LATRESHA Woodruff, Sergeant Thomas Cole, and Kelly Ward. Guys, what do you make out of this? I still have a hard time understanding how someone in, and I know we're in 2021 and Maranda disappeared in 2015. It's just hard for me to wrap my head around somebody who can remain anonymous in 2015. Pine Bluff police saying that this woman that called in this anonymous tip likely has more information that could bring Miranda's killers to justice. What do you make out of it, LATRESHA?
It's like you said, it's hard to believe that someone is still anonymous this many years later after giving that information. And even that, it's hard to think that a person will want to remain anonymous after they've seen that this case has not been solved. When they gave that information, I would think that they were giving that information so they could find her body and solve this case. Well, that didn't happen. They found her body, but the case has not been solved. So in my mind, I'm thinking, why hasn't this person reached back out so that they can give more information that helps solve this case? But it's like Kelly said, we don't know if this person had some direct knowledge of it, or it was hearsay, some secondhand information, or were they involved in it? And that could be the reason that they've not reached back out. They may have just wanted her body to be found for her family and not get involved in it. But we need people to get involved in this. It's a 23-year-old girl. Her parents are devastated that they don't know what happened to her. She seemed to have a lot of friends, and as her mom said, she was a very helpful person. She was liked by everyone, but she also said she was very trusting of people. Someone needs to come forward. That anonymous person, if they're listening to us, you know, I implore them to come forward, give some more information so that this family can finally find out what happened to 23-year-old Maranda Goldman. She deserves some justice.
She absolutely does, and I want to welcome folks in who are watching right now. Clarissa is watching using the hashtag Monday Night Mystery. You can see it right there. And folks, you can also interact and ask questions with us using the hashtag Monday Night Mystery right here on Facebook, and the panel can ask questions. I do find a question here, just watching the Facebook comments, they did not use the hashtag Monday Night Mystery, so we can't bring it in. They're asking about surveillance cameras in the parking lot. You know, we're talking about 2015 here, Sergeant Thomas Cole, major crimes detective. They're absolutely right. You would think that there'd be some kind of surveillance camera that would lead Pine Bluff police detectives to possibly who saw her last, depending on if she was able to leave with or without anyone.
Yeah, I mean, 2015 is not that long ago, Mitch. And just looking at the footage you guys have, I'm not real familiar with that area, but it looks like that Goodwill is part of a shopping center. So even if Goodwill didn't have cameras, surely some business out there did. And of course, you know, we don't have an investigator from the case here to that may be able to answer some of those questions. And even if they were here, they might not be able to. But you know, so I don't know if they were able to get any kind of video or talk to folks that were out there. But it certainly looks like it was a fairly kind of busy area, or a place where if there were any cameras around, they would probably be able to get some footage from it.
You would think so. You absolutely would think so. But, you know, it's interesting because I remember earlier this week, LATRESHA Woodruff, you and I were live together covering that Amber Alert out of Missouri. And, you know, that surveillance camera wasn't very good.
It wasn't good at all, but it did capture something. So they did have something to go on in that case. It seems here that there is nothing. They'd much rather have a grainy, sort of blurry piece of video and picture than to not have anything at all. But I also wonder, you know, what was her demeanor that day? I know she went to a job interview. What did the people at the Goodwill store say about her? It seems that she was leaving her job interview to go home to her mom. So that makes me wonder if this was some stranger that did something to her, because she seemed to have her day planned. She was leaving to go home to her mom. Her mom said that they did not have, they had to share a vehicle, so she was actually on her way home. So what happened after she left that Goodwill store between her leaving and after she called her mom and not making it home? Those are things that go through my head about it. It kind of makes me think that maybe this was someone she did not know, someone that saw her in that shopping center or along the way. So there's a lot of questions in this that need answers. And if we could just get that anonymous person to call again and give some more information on this.
Kelly Ward, a former prosecutor, what do you make out of this, this entire case? More specifically, you mentioned something towards the beginning of the show, and you were talking about the condition of the body and when that body was found. You know, there's a lot of evidence that could be recovered off of the body, specifically at the Arkansas State Crime Lab. But it doesn't seem like that has pointed us in any kind of direction.
It doesn't seem like that's created any leads. Of course, we don't know exactly what the investigators know, but I was talking about the condition of the body. Had the body been in the woods for a month? Or was it? Could they tell that it had been placed there recently? You know, you can look at the brush, the grass, things that are surrounding the body, where the clothing. You know, what was the condition of the clothing? Clothing is a really good, well, it can be something that can be used for DNA. Swabs of the body as well, but clothing can be something that you can get DNA from. If you can't get it from swabs of skin, you could get it touch DNA or transfer from clothing sometimes. So that could be another thing that might lead them to a suspect. But what LATRESHA said is absolutely correct. This person who called in, this anonymous person, they have more information. And if they could just give them a little bit more to point them in a little bit more of a direction towards a suspect. I'm wondering also, Mitch, if what the condition of her cell phone was. We know she called her mother before she headed home, and so she had a phone. Have they checked the location, her cell tower locations? Because they can do that through the carrier, so they could track her location from the Goodwill store to where she went next. We don't know if her phone was found with her or if it was in the car. So that's information that we don't have, but an investigator would want to know who she'd been calling, who she'd been texting, and what that location data was as well.
Kelly mentioned the car. I see a car in the video and wondering how that all plays into it. I know she was driving her mother's car, or car that they shared, but it seems like that car was found. So what was inside of that car? What was the condition of the car, and where was it even found? Those are important questions as well that could possibly lead to figuring out what happened to her.
There's that car you were talking about. Let me see if I can back that video up. You're absolutely right, because just last week, and we're going to have to drop that graphic there, but you can see from what we gather from the mom, the car possibly had broken down, and it does look like it's not in the parking lot of that Goodwill store. But there are just so many unknowns. I do want to get to Sergeant Thomas Cole, who is a major crimes detective. And before we do that, I just want to remind folks that you are watching Monday Night Mystery. You can use the hashtag Monday Night Mystery right here on Facebook, and we will get your questions in to the panel. Sergeant Cole, we have two questions for you. One is going to be somebody using the hashtag. We'll get to that in a moment. But I want to get to what Kelly Ward was just talking about. And she was talking about detectives looking at the area around where Miranda's body was found, which could help deliver clues. What specifically would a detective look for at a crime scene to A, determine if the crime was committed there, but B, if this was possibly a location where the body had just been dumped?
Yeah, so I think Kelly was kind of alluding to it, but there are a lot of things about the crime scene that you would want to look at to see, kind of just in a broad sense, whether or not it all makes sense. So as far as the body being out there, if it had been out there 30 days, obviously you'd have had a lot of weather come through. In that time period, you almost certainly would have had rain. And so you would potentially have, mud or leaves or just part of the environment would be to some extent potentially covering the body. You also would have kind of different kind of bug life, not to get too macabre, but you might just the exposure would cause a different type of decomposition or a different look to it than if the body, for example, had been stored in a car trunk, for example, or something like that. You'd also be able to kind of compare the decomposition to the known temperatures from the time. So if it's a colder time of year, you would expect a certain decomposition rate if the body had been out in the weather versus if it was a hot time of year. And then compare that to, if it had been kept indoors somewhere, anything like that. So it's really looking at the whole picture and seeing if it all kind of fits together and makes sense. And if it does, then that may be where she died. But if that doesn't make sense, then you may need to start looking for potentially, well, that would mean this would be a secondary crime scene. You might be needing to look for a primary crime scene. But then you can also look at other potential evidence that could be there, like tire tracks or drag marks that could potentially still be in the dirt. If one person were to have to carry a body, they might have to drag it a little more than if there were two people. It's just all kinds of things that a good detective or investigator just has to be on the lookout for and know to be looking for.
On the front end of the investigation, more or less, I mean, that's why it's so important that officers secure that crime scene immediately, so that way they can preserve anything and they can really start to figure out those clues. I want to remind folks that we are broadcasting live tonight, and I'm going to throw up the hashtag one more time here. Hashtag Monday Night Mystery for folks who want to interact with the panel and ask questions. And I want to get to a question coming in right now using that hashtag Monday Night Mystery. Vanessa is wondering what testing was completed on Miranda, and she's using that hashtag Monday Night Mystery. Sergeant Cole, obviously, you're not the lead detective on this case. Worth noting, we did invite Pine Bluff Police on multiple times, did not get an email back. What would you say, what kind of testing would have been done?
Yeah, so the body would be sent to the state crime lab for examination by a medical examiner. It is very thorough. I've sat in on several autopsies from various types of homicides and deaths. So they're going to look at all kinds of things. They'll look at the tissue and see if there's any obvious signs of injury. They'll actually do kind of an analysis on the internal organs. They'll look at toxicology, what's in the blood. The problem will be on a case like this where there's likely significant decomposition, that a lot of that kind of evidence may have gone away at that point. So if there were, for example, a stab wound, but there's significant decomposition that might be harder for an examiner to see or potentially impossible. So it just kind of depends on the state of the body, but they will essentially, especially when there's no clues to cause of death, they kind of look at everything that they possibly can from a medical standpoint. and sometimes it's kind of a needle in a haystack. And if, for example, if the death was caused by a chemical, then there may not be any kind of outward signs on the body, and it may require tissue analysis or toxicology of whatever is still there. And so sometimes, depending on the level of decomposition, that can be a pretty tough thing to get to.
And this looks like a fairly residential neighborhood where 38th and Ohio, yeah, there's some woods, and her body was found near a pond. LATRESHA Woodruff, a police and communications expert, the fact that this appears to be a residential neighborhood may help in some respect?
You would think it would when you go back and start maybe canvassing that area and asking people if they saw anything. Again, we always talk about how people see things and it doesn't appear odd at the moment, but when they learn something has happened there, then they start thinking about, okay, that day or in the weeks before she was found, I saw X, Y, and Z. It looked suspicious to me now that I look back on it and think about it. So it looks like it was a busy area where the Goodwill is, and then even where her body was eventually found. So you would think that you would be able to talk with people in that area and get something that helps lead to leads in this case, really.
You would think. You would think. Have a question coming in here now, and this question's coming in from Minnie using the hashtag Monday Night Mystery. Did they check her cell phone for pings and locations? I wish we could ask this question. Pine Bluff Police not available to come on the show tonight. Sergeant Thomas Cole, is this normal procedures? Is this just procedural in an investigation, is to check for cell phones?
Well, yes, especially if you know that she had a phone, and in a case like this where you don't have a whole lot to go on at the beginning, obviously you're going to look for any kind of leads that could take you to some kind of concrete information. And it may be as simple as finding out, if her phone was turned off at some point. But also, yeah, in 2015, there should be pretty good cell phone records, GPS locations, just kind of depending on how active the phone was and how many towers there are in that area. They could potentially have some very detailed information as far as just the location of the phone. May not tell us exactly what happened, but it could give a lot more ideas on potential primary crime scenes or just other places that they can literally just go and look around for any evidence.
But getting to Kelly Ward, a former prosecutor, Kelly, just because cell phone pings come in does not mean that the investigation is shut. I mean, there is still a lot of legwork to do. The cell phone pings aren't going to connect the dots in a courtroom.
Sure. So that's just going to give you an idea. Let's say you got that cell site location data, or what we've described as the pings on the tower from her cell phone. It would just give you a general idea of where the cell phone was at that time. That you could be a distance from the tower and you never know which direction. I mean, the tower could be right next 20 yards away, or it could be probably up to a mile away. It just depends on how many towers there are. It could be further than that. It just gives you a general idea of the location of the phone at the time. So just because, the phone was in that area, that doesn't necessarily mean that, you've solved the case. You'd have to go to that area, as Sergeant Cole said, do a search, talk to people. It just gives you a place to start. What I always do as a prosecutor is create that timeline. The timeline can tell you so much about things that have happened, but also things that you need to know about. And once you get that timeline set up, you start looking at who she was around at what time, and then trying to fill in those gaps.
And then at this point, a lot of it comes down to witness cooperation. LATRESHA Woodruff, the police can't solve crimes without people.
We cannot solve crimes without people. And that goes back to this anonymous person that called in the location of her body. We really need that person to come forward to help solve this case. But it's likely that this is not the only person who knows anything about what happened here. Perhaps people have talked about it, and for all we know, this anonymous person could have gotten this information from someone else. And I would guarantee that there's more than one person who knows about what happened there. We cannot solve cases without people. We would love for someone to come forward and add to this investigation so that we can find out what happened to this 23-year-old young woman.
Want to remind folks that you're watching Monday Night Mystery. There is a reward available for information leading to the arrest and conviction of the person who killed Maranda Goldman. If you missed any part of our show tonight, you can rewatch it in its full entirety shortly after our broadcast concludes. As we wrap up here, LATRESHA, Sergeant Cole Kelly, final thoughts, and we will begin with Kelly tonight.
I would just say that this person who made the anonymous tip, if they could just contact law enforcement, either in their town or Pine Bluff or the state police, and give more information about how they learned where her body was, it would help this family so much. And you can just see how devastated her mother is to lose her child at 23 years old. And now, in addition to not knowing what happened, and that not knowing is just like exacerbating the pain. So if anyone has any information, please call the Pine Bluff Police Department or your local law enforcement agency, and let's help bring justice for Miranda's case.
Sergeant Thomas Cole.
Yeah, I would just say something that we've heard Cara talk about several times. Mitch, and I don't know everything about this case. I haven't seen the case file or talked to an investigator, but I kind of feel like there were probably multiple people involved in this in some way. There's already been someone call in one anonymous tip. It could very well happen again. And I would just say to the people that were actually involved, the person who comes forward first tends to do the best in court, tends to be the one that gets some kind of a deal offered, and tends to be looked on a little more favorably by a jury when they can kind of see that, hey, a family's got some closure because someone came forward. So if there were multiple folks, I would say if you were one of them, be the first to come forward. It's been 6 years. You've got a mom who will never get over the loss of her daughter, but who may find some comfort in knowing what happened and knowing that there's some kind of justice. And if you can be that person, that certainly helps your case a little bit in the end, as opposed to if the police just have to figure it out the hard way and come find you, hiding in a corner somewhere.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. LATRESHA Woodruff, police communications expert.
I believe this case is solvable. You've had one person who called in that anonymous tip that led to her body. We're just waiting for someone else to call in that will lead us to what happened to Miranda. Her mom, as Sergeant Cole said, she has a mom who loved her, who is fighting and continuing to fight for justice for her daughter. So I really do believe this is solvable. We have talked about some cases on here that had way less answers than what we have in this case. And we've probably all thought in the back of our minds that it's probably going to take a lot to solve this case. But I truly feel that this case is solvable. We just need that one clue. The detectives down there in Pine Bluff need that one clue that will help them solve this case and bring justice again to Miranda and help her family move on from this part of what they're dealing with right now. So I'm just asking again, appealing to anyone who has information to call it in. Call it into your police department, or call it into the Pine Bluff Police Department or any department that you feel comfortable with, because this information will get back to those who are investigating it. Help us figure out what happened to Maranda Goldman and bring some closure in this case.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And you could even call any of the people right here on the panel tonight, and they would get that information to the Pine Bluff Police Department. Again, Maranda Goldman, last seen October 8th, 2015. She was leaving a job interview, called her mom after that interview, and never returned home. Her body was found a month later in the woods after an anonymous tip came in from a mystery woman. Who is that woman? That's the big question. And Pine Bluff police have said before that they believe that woman has more information about what happened to Maranda. And they believe that person may have the key to the courtroom, right? Person to bring those other individuals to justice, if there are other individuals. If you know anything about this case, you are asked to call the Pine Bluff Police Department. Again, you can call your local law enforcement agency. You can also call Sergeant Thomas Cole. You could call Kelly. You can call LATRESHA, and they will certainly help pass along that information to the Pine Bluff Police Department. Thanks, guys, for joining us tonight on Monday Night Mystery. We're back next Monday with a brand new mystery. If you missed any part of our show tonight, you can watch it in its full entirety on KRK.com and Fox16.com. For now, I'm Mitch McCoy. I hope you have a good rest of your night.